The 18th century is a moment when a whole series of wars fought for the succession over a given throne were fought. We had the War of the Austrian Succession, we had the War of the Spanish Succession, and we also had the War of the Polish Succession. And today, a presentation of a game which is focused on this last one. But the place where the battle, which I would like to talk about, was fought is absolutely no there where you would expect it. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today, a review of a game which is focused on the War of the Polish Succession, a conflict which is very rarely used in wargaming, but which is the inspiration, or rather the topic of the game which I will be presenting today. This will be the review of Parma 1734. Parma 1734 is a game released by Aleph Game Studio in 2020, which was designed by Enrico Acerbi. This is a game for 2 players, aged 14 or higher, and the time of play will be somewhere around 2 to 4 hours. This is a game in battalion scale, which is part of a series, Discipline and Command. During the game, one of the players will take control of the Austrian forces, the second one of the French and Piedmontese army. The Battle of Parma, known also as the Battle of Crocettą, fought in 1734, was a battle fought at the outskirts of the city of Parma. An Austrian army led by the Marshal Mercy tried to push back the French and Piedmontese forces, destroy them, and then to seize Parma. The battle was fought so close to the city that the inhabitants of Parma could see what was happening on the battlefield. And although the Austrians had the upper hand in the first part of the battle, they managed to push back the French and Piedmontese troops. When Marshal Mercy was killed, the tide was turned, and it was the French and the Piedmontese forces who started to push back the Austrians. In the end, the Austrian army retired, and it's the French and Piedmontese forces who prevailed, saving Parma from being taken by the Austrians and probably from being sacked. So this is an interesting engagement, part of the War of the Polish Succession, as you can see, fought in a totally different area than Poland itself. During the game, we will be taking control of the forces, not only of the ones which are present on the battlefield, but also of the ones which will be entering the battlefield during the game, because during the game several new reinforcements will arrive trying to reinforce both sides in order to destroy their foes. During this review, I'd like to show you how this game looks, then briefly explain how it works, and at the end, as usually, I'd like to give you my opinions and my final thoughts concerning this title. So let's jump right into it and let's take a look at how Parma 1734 looks.
Here is a brief look at Parma 1734. On the box we have a subtitle, The Battle of Crocettą, which underlines the fact that this battle is known also under this name. Now this is a game for 2 players. One of the players will take control of the French and Piedmontese forces, the second one of the Austrian army. The map itself depicts the region where the battle was fought. We have the city of Parma on the map, on the eastern part of it, but this part of the map is inaccessible. We cannot enter Parma, although some French and Piedmontese reinforcements will be coming to the battle from this side of the map. On the central part of the map, we have also the part called La Crocettà, which is also the second name under which this battle is known. Now the battle is, as I said a few moments ago, for 2 players, and historically the Austrians had the upper hand in the first part of the battle, during which they arrived from the northern part of the battlefield under Marshal Mercy, who decided to attack the French instantly, even without having sufficient troops on the other side of the Naviglio del Taro. He decided to strike against the French forces immediately. He led an attack and he managed to repulse them from their initial positions. The battle was an extremely violent one, and although it seemed that the upper hand was still in Austrian hands, this changed significantly in the early afternoon. At that point, additional French and Piedmontese reinforcements started to secure the central part of the Allied position, and at the same time Marshal Mercy was also killed in battle while leading one of the Austrian attacks. This made the Austrians to wonder if they had the possibility of breaking through the Allied lines. They hesitated, and in the end they retreated, and they were forced back by the French and Piedmontese forces. New Austrian troops arrived, but still the French and Piedmontese managed to push back the Austrian army towards their initial positions. In the end, the Austrians decided to retreat, and the battlefield was secured by the Allied forces, resulting in a French and Piedmontese victory. The battle was quite bloody, and in the end the French and Piedmontese army prevailed, which secured Parma. It saved Parma from being sacked by the Austrians. A curiosity is that many inhabitants of Parma were watching the actual battle took place from the city walls, so this is one of those situations in history where the combatants had a lot of spectators, in this case the inhabitants of Parma. Now in the game, the main objective of each player will be to reduce enemy armies' morale to a point which will incline our opponent to retreat from the battlefield. So we will be trying to inflict losses to our opponent in order to reduce his morale. Each army starts with a certain amount of morale, and each time a unit takes a hit, it is reduced, or the first time an enemy unit is routed, we score points, or we rather reduce the morale of the opposing army. If we manage to reduce the opposing army morale to a level of 10% of their initial strength, the army is broken and the army retreats, meaning that the player controlling such an army loses the game. The game is played in a maximum of 13 turns, and we have 13 turns in order to secure such a sudden death condition. If the game ends without it, well, we do not know what to do because the rules do not specify, but we can assume that the player having a higher morale prevailing still wins. Or maybe the game ends in a tie. I do not know what was the idea of the designer. In the game we have two scenarios: an instructional scenario which lasts only 5 turns, which is supposed to teach us the main mechanisms, and the second one which is the full battle fought in a 13 turns length, which is 13 turns long. When it comes to the game, as I said, that our main objective will be to reduce the enemy's morale to a certain level, and we will be doing it by inflicting hits. This means that units which are present in the game will have several steps. So this means that units have not less than 3 steps. The first hit makes us to return the unit, making it less powerful. The second hit inflicted to a unit will disorganize it, and the last hit inflicted to a unit will remove it from the game. So in fact we have to inflict 3 hits in order to destroy completely a unit. Units have several parameters printed on the counter. We have the movement factor, we have the regimental breaking point factor, we have the discipline factor, which is used for several tests, but also in order to calculate the strength of a unit in shock combat and in distance combat when the unit fires at opponents. And we have also a shock combat additional bonus if the unit is engaged in close combat. During the game, we will be activating our units and we will be giving them orders. But this will not be that easy, because in the game we have an interesting mechanism which is used, which is the mechanism of assigning wing priorities, because in the game, as you can see, each unit will have a colored band indicating to which part of the army such a unit is being part of. And we have 4 different wings in each army. Those wings are represented by 4 special counters, which indicate also, which will be used in order to indicate which parts of our army will be activated at what point of the turn. Because during the first phase of each turn, we will be passing through a command phase during which each player will simultaneously and secretly assign wing priorities. Meaning that each player will be placing his 4 counters on his specific wing priority track in the order that he wishes to activate his own units. And both players will do it secretly. This is somewhat comparable to the cheat pool system, in which players will be drawing activation cheats from a common pool. Here it's something similar but very different, because players will have control over the order in which they will be activating parts of their army. This is a big difference because it enables not only to control at what point of the turn we will be activating our own formations, it also enables us to try to respond or to anticipate what our opponent does. For instance, if we know that our opponent has the upper hand on our left wing, he will probably want to exploit this and activate his right wing at first. But at the same time, this means that we can possibly exploit his weakness in another part of the battlefield, for instance, using our central part in order to push back his own center. So, anticipating what our opponent wants to do, what we want to achieve, is a great additional layer to the game. And I like this command system. I like the way how units or parts of our army are being activated in Parma 1734. Now, after assigning those priorities, we have a very short phase in which artillery units can fire, because apart from cavalry, we have obviously also infantry units, but we have also some artillery units which can be used in order to fire at opposing troops at a certain range. Then we have the initiative phase, when we roll a die and determine who has the initiative, and then we pass to the most important phase, the wing impulse phase, during which, starting from the player who has the initiative, we will be unveiling our tokens in order to indicate which parts of our army can be activated at that point. Activated units can be moved, can participate in ranged fire, in ranged combat, can participate in shock combat, and after all those actions are taken, it's up to our opponent to unveil his activation token in order to activate one of the parts of his army. What is interesting also is the fact that apart from the different steps that units have, it's also important to control in which formation they are currently present on the battlefield, because units can be in different formations. Then they can be in a free formation, meaning that they have no additional counter added to them, which gives them freedom of movement, which enables them to use a lot of their potential, but not all their powers can be used, and they do not obtain any additional benefits of being in such a formation. If they want to receive additional benefits, they should be placed into column or into line formation. Now, column formation is used explicitly for movement. A unit is covered by a in column formation counter, and such a unit can move a lot quicker through roads and paths. It is also a way to transport or to move our unit from one part of the battlefield to another quicker than normally. At the same time, such a unit is more vulnerable to enemy attacks, because only the first unit in such a column can defend. Units cannot use their full potential in order to attack enemy troops, and also they cannot form any stacks, because it's impossible to have more than one unit in column formation on one hex. And another formation is the line formation, which on the other hand is used strictly for combat. Used units in line formation, which can be formed by units from the same regiment, receive an additional bonus. Firstly, in combat. Secondly, when it comes to the range at which units can fire. Normally, infantry can fire only at a distance of 1 hex, but being in a line formation increases their range by 1 additional hex, meaning that they get more firepower and they are more powerful while attacking their enemies. This is an interesting, important formation. So formations are an important aspect of Parma 1734, which reflects how battles were fought at that time. So after movements, after firing at our opponents, after shock combat, which can also be a cavalry charge, because cavalry can charge at our opponents, we pass on to another activation. What is important also is the fact that in the game we have all the command system included, which means not only activating different wings in a given priority, but also maintaining a certain line of command. Each army will have several leaders, which will have a factor indicating how efficient they will be while reorganize their troops, but also a factor indicating what is the range of command. Because in order to be fully effective, units have to stay in a range corresponding to their leader. Additionally, each commander will receive also one subordinate who has also the army's banner and who can also transfer the command of his own leader towards units which are present at his range. So in order to be fully operational, units have to stay in a certain range to their commander. If they don't, in order to activate them, we have to make a die roll and verify if the discipline of such a unit enables them to be activated even without being in a command range or even without being in the range of our commander. Apart from that, there are some other rules governing, for instance, how artillery fires, how units fire. There are some specific rules concerning shock combat, but I will be addressing those during my final part of the video. We have other rules governing different kinds of terrain, governing also reinforcements, because what deserves to be also underlined is the fact that only a small part of the units start the game on the map board. A lot of them will be entering the battlefield through different directions. This is why we receive in the game several additional sheets on which we have the information which unit enters the map and on each turn from which part of the map. So a lot of new units will appear on the board, meaning that a lot will be happening on the map board, although from battle to battle the situation will be rather similar, because for instance, if French or Piedmontese units enter the map board from one of Parma's gates, they will probably be used on our left wing or our central part of the battlefield. Rarely we will see those units travel the whole map and reinforce another sector. But this is also another topic which I will be addressing during the final part of this video. So without further ado, without explaining additional details, I'd like to invite you now to this final part of the video, during which I'd like to give you my final thoughts concerning Parma 1734, and during which I'd like to underline what I liked in this design and what I think are the weaker points of it.
Parma 1734 is not the first game of Aleph Game Studio which I am showing you on my channel. I have already reviewed La Belle Époque very recently, and also some time ago I presented you Dego and Montecuccoli on the Rab. And if you remember Dego and Montecuccoli on the Rab, while presenting those games I had a lot of problems, I had a lot of remarks concerning both the quality of those games as well as the quality of the rules. La Belle Époque was a totally different game, which I really prized, which I really liked, which I think is excellent both in terms of the quality of the components as well as in terms of how the rules of the game were written and presented. When it comes to Parma 1734, there are some issues, and I'd like to tell you what I think about this game, and I'd like also to tell you what are the precise things which I found difficult or problematic in this title. But as always, I'd like to start by things which I liked in this game, and there are several things. Firstly, what deserves to be underlined is the fact that Parma 1734 is a product of very high quality in terms of what we receive in the box and how it looks. Firstly, I really like the map. It's a map which is very precise, which is very pretty, which is at the same time very functional. You have absolutely no doubt how to read the information which is presented on the map. Counters are without any problem stacked on the hexes. The hexes are well numbered. There are absolutely no problems. At the same time, as I said earlier, the game is absolutely very pretty. The same applies to the counters, which are of an extremely high quality. The information presented on those counters are very clear, very well laid. At the same time, the counters are already rounded. So here I'd like to say that Aleph Game Studio made a huge path forward in terms of what they provide in their boxes compared to Dago and Montecuccoli on the wrap. Both La Belle Époque as well as Parma 1744 are products of a very high quality in terms of how the elements inside of those boxes look. The second thing which I really liked in this game and which I always underline, which I always prize, is the topic. I always like games which are focused on, up until now, subjects which weren't used as topics for war games. This is obviously a very difficult task because while designing a game about the Bulge or about Gettysburg, you have tons of other designs, you have tons of other games, and you can base upon them, you can see how they were designed, you can take some elements from one or the other and try to create something on your own. But here the work is even bigger because not only you have to design a game in terms of how it will work, but secondly you have to make a very important research and consecrate a lot of time in order to look through the sources, to take a look at how the armies were presented, how the armies were located, what was the order of battle, which units took part in the battle, who were the leaders, how they looked, what was their equipment, etc. So a lot of work has to be put into creating a game which is focused on something which up until this point wasn't used in wargaming. And the War of the Polish Succession is not a very popular, it's not a very well-known subject. So kudos to Aleph Game Studio and to Enrico Acerbi for deciding to release a game covering this interesting subject and this interesting battle. The third thing which I like in this game is the fact that when playing it and when looking at it, when browsing through the rules, you see that a lot of work has been put into trying to recreate how battles, how armies worked in the first part of the 18th century. So we have a lot of mechanisms which try to simulate how armies and how armies behave and how battles were fought. We have a lot of interesting elements concerning formations, both column as well as lines, free formations. It all depends on how your units are structured, what formation they are in, when you want to see what they can achieve. If they want to move fast, they have to be in column formation, but at the same time, they can be placed only on roads or paths. If you want to have maximum firepower, you have to form a line. And it's all very clear. It's at the same time very climatic, and at the same time it's very thematic because it is well linked to how armies were structured and how they behave on battlefields at the beginning of the 18th century. But that's not it. That's not all. Not only formations are such elements. We have different kinds of cavalry. We have heavy cavalry, we have cuirassiers, we have light cavalry who behave a little bit differently because only light cavalry, for instance, can retire and reform. We have also a very important element which is fire, which is firing at enemies. You can fire both in free formation as well as in line, but when firing in line, you have a significantly biggest range. You can fire at 2 hexes instead of 1. At the same time, when firing as a line, as a structure being a line, you have a significantly higher firepower. So those are elements which are interesting, which in my opinion are elements which really nicely simulate how battlefields and how armies looked at the beginning of the 18th century. Additionally, what I like is the command system, in which you really have to focus on keeping your units in command, because if you send them somewhere very far from your leader and you allow them to act independently, they will risk to be out of command and they will be significantly hindered by this fact. So where to place your commander, where to place your subordinate will be very important factors, very important elements, and those again are things which are very well linked to how armies worked, how armies acted in the first part of the 18th century. Lastly, what I really enjoyed in this game while playing it was the idea with the predefined activation of the separate wings. You have 4 distinctive wings related to the units which are present on the battlefield, and it's up to you in which order you will activate them. Now, we have a lot of games in which we are using the cheat pool system, when you randomly draw activation cheats corresponding to some formations which you can activate. But this activation is random. Here you can plan it. But at the same time, while planning the order, you cannot focus only on what you want to do. You have to also take into consideration what your opponent wants to do. So trying to see in which order your opponent will be trying to activate his own formations gives you also an indication in which order you should activate your units. So we have a little bit of a cat and mouse play here, in which we will be trying not only to activate our formations in such a way to exploit some local advantages, but at the same time we'll be trying also to counter what our opponent is doing. And I really enjoy this mechanism a lot. So having said all that, one might wonder, what is the problem with this game? I'd say that this game has 2 major problems, but the first one is definitely the one which I'd like to focus right now. It's the rules. The rule book is a catastrophic one, and I'm really not comfortable to say it, because while reviewing Montecuccoli and the Rab and Dego, I already said that the games are clever ones, that they have a lot of interesting elements, they have a lot of potential. But the fact that the rules were so badly written really influenced the way how I perceive them. And unfortunately, in Parma 1734, it's the same problem. Although the quality of the components is significantly higher than in Dego and Montecuccoli and the Rab, it's really another world, no question about it. But unfortunately, in the rules element, it's still the same huge problem. Now, the rule book is a mess. It's a total mess. And not only it's written in a language which is not even close to English, because there are so many problems in translation, as I suppose. And even if it was corrected, I saw in the booklet that there was a correction. It was not a very precise one. We have tons of errors, we have grammatical, bizarre structures. It's a language which is somewhere close to being English, but not really English. I'm not an English is not my mother tongue, but still, with my knowledge of English, I had issues while reading this booklet. Secondly, if this was the only problem, I wouldn't mind, because I understand that creating a rule book is a difficult task, but I do not like games in which we have blank spots, omissions, contradictions, errors, and it's the case of the booklet of Parma 1744. We have some things which are contradictory. For instance, in one part of the booklet we have information concerning discipline. In another one we have an information about a leadership test, which is nothing more than a discipline test. So why to use both expressions? In the initial setup of the first introductory scenario, we have errors. we have errors concerning where units should be placed on the Austrian side, because we have several units placed on the same hex, which is, as we know if we read the rules concerning column movement, prohibited. So we have a new initial setup for the Austrians published on BoardGameGeek as an additional file. Additionally, in this scenario, the victory conditions are written in such a way that firstly, it's impossible to win for the French because they have to capture a flag or kill Merci, and the Austrians, knowing that, will protect them at all costs. It will be impossible for the French to reach those two leaders and to kill them, so the French at best can hope for a tie. At the same time, the Austrians do not exactly know where to place their units in order to win, because they can capture the flag, kill the enemy leader, as can do the French, but they also can win, the Austrians, while placing 4 infantry units in line formation towards Parma on the overside of the Bonaventura stream. But on the map, we do not have Bonaventura stream, we have the Bonaventura canal. So we might wonder what Bonaventura stream is. Of course, we can deducate, we can think which of them is the one, but at the same time, it's not explicitly explained in the rules. We have a thread on BoardGameGeek again, where it is explained, but it is again explained in such a way that the example shows only one of the hexes, which is on the overside of the canal, which in my opinion shouldn't be taken into consideration. So it's explained, but it's not explained in a way that could enable to avoid any confusion. Then we have also some elements which are present in the rules or which are present in the player aid, which aren't explained at all. For instance, advance after combat. So we have advance after combat on the player aid cards, but we have absolutely nothing about advancing after combat in the rules. We do not know how to play advance after combat, and again on BoardGameGeek it was explained that this part of the player aid should be just ignored. On the line formation counters, we have a multiplier multiplied by 2. Nothing in the rules says what this multiplier is supposed to do. Again, on BoardGameGeek, it's explained that this is a multiplier which will be used in other games of the same system. Great, that's a nice explanation, but why wasn't it included in the rulebook? When a unit is out of command, how are we supposed to mark it? We do not have any counter in order to mark it. We should use another counter or just remember that this unit is out of command. But remember, being out of command has really a great impact. It's an important thing. You should mark it, but you have no counter in order to do it. What about cavalry charges? When a cavalry unit enters an enemy hex and it attacks this unit, and both units stay put on the same hex at the conclusion of combat, what are we supposed to do? Are those two units meant to stay together, which is prohibited by the rules, or should the enemy unit retreat, or maybe the cavalry unit should retreat? We do not know. We have no explanation in the rules. If a line formation shoots at an opponent, we are supposed to reduce our firepower by 2 columns. But if we're on the first column, are we supposed to reduce to the first one and use the first one, or is fire prohibited at this moment? We do not know. When we attack units, we are supposed to use the power efficiency, the combat power efficiency of the unit which is the strongest one. So while attacking a unit, it might happen that actually it won't be us shock attacking the enemy, because the enemy will have a significantly higher parameter, which means that he will be rolling on the shock combat table, and he can inflict us some damage. It's the first time that I have seen such a structure, such an idea of creating a combat resolution table, and I still can't find a reason why it was decided in such a way. It's the first instance, I believe, in wargaming when I have seen a table in which the attacker can become the defender due to the fact that he has a smaller power in smaller combat efficiency in combat. So the attacker, while knowing it, won't have absolutely any incentive to attack. and I do not see any reason to structure it in such a way. So those are examples of problems which are in the rules, or which are blank spots in the rules, which make the game really hard to even start. And it's quite problematic because each player, each human being has a certain amount of patience. And if our patience runs out, it's difficult to return to a task. And here I must to be sincere. While playing Parma 1734 for the first time, I really had a lot of problems. I tried to play this game and then I stopped. I completely stopped because I was so overwhelmed by the number of mistakes, by the number of unclear situations, that I decided to put the game away, and I returned to it after a week or so, trying to play it, trying to overcome all those problems. I read all the topics on Board Game Geek, but to be sincere, should I really do it? I believe that the game wasn't sufficiently tested. It wasn't sufficiently proofread. If both things were done, a lot of those mistakes could have been avoided. And it's really a shame, because I like the topic, because I like the mechanical ideas, I like the quality of the components. I do not like the booklet, I do not like the way how the rules were presented. It really took away all the joy of playing this game. One last thing concerning the things which I think can be problematic in Parma 1744, because I said at the beginning that there are two issues. The first one being the major one are the rules, but there is also a second one. This is the replay value. I think that the replay value of Parma 1734 will be quite low. The reason is we have only one scenario. I totally omit the introductory scenario because it's not worth even playing. You should always play the complete scenario, in which the game can really shine at some point if you overcome all the problems concerning the rules. But at the same time, playing this game twice, 3 times might lead to a conclusion that the game tends to be repetitive. I played the game 3 times, and on games 2 and 3, the battles went very much pretty much the same as in the first case. And in the end, it's the one who rolled more often, who activated his wings more often or before their opponent, managed to win and score more hits than his opponent, because it's up to scoring hits, it's up to reducing your opponent's units and reducing his army's morale in order to win. And you can accomplish it by firing at your unit, by shock attacking them, etc. So at some point, the units will be entering onto the map, because only a small part of those units start the game during a scenario. And the points of entrance of those units instantly implicate where those units will be used. For instance, if Austrian units enter from the southern part of the board, you will almost always decide to use them in the southern part of the battlefield. The same applies to the French units who will be entering from the northern part, from Parma or from the south. They will be used in the sectors where they are being needed. And at most times, those will be the sectors which is the closest to the one from which those units enter the battlefield. So at most times, those units were used in the very same place each and every time, which significantly reduces the number of possibilities, which significantly reduces replay value. So I think that Parma 1744, although interesting in terms of how it works, what are its basic ideas, what are its mechanisms, although very interesting, has those two problems which might hinder your joy, which might reduce the satisfaction that this title provides. Having said all that, I think that Parma 1744 is an interesting design with a great potential, which deserves to receive a new booklet, which reserves a 1.2 version, which could enable players to fully enjoy how this game works. This was the review of Parma 1734, released by Aleph Game Studio. Thank you a lot for watching this review. I invite you also to take a look at my other videos. Take also a look what I am publishing on my Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a great day and see you next time.